please remember to leave a like, a comment, share the video about, and if you haven't already, subscribe. Thank you. Well, isn't this just fantastic? Captain's log, subdates 231009.9. As renovations are fully underway, I've tried to move my NPC crew away from the derelict room and house them in a disused dumpster that's been labelled Come Defund Waste. It might require a wash. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be revisiting a group we haven't spoken of on this channel for quite some time, in the form of Just Stop Oil. If you don't know who they are, they believe themselves to be eco-warriors, protesters, climate activists, saving the world for future generations by doing peaceful protests that skirt the line between legal and illegal, that in turn led to the UK government nanny-stating it up even more than they ordinarily do, introducing a rule where the police can disperse your protest if they choose to. A rule I fundamentally disagree with and is entirely the fault of Just Stop Oil, the middle-class, white, privileged idiots disrupting everyday people who in turn do not care for them in the slightest. Some protested on bridges, some protested on motorways, others just walk up and down London's more exclusive regions, because that's of course where the oikorie work. There should be a sarcasm for that, I know, but I'm sure you get the message. We haven't spoken to them for quite some time because, in truth, they haven't really done much. On the face of it, that sounds a bit strange, doesn't it? 2 years ago, they took Christmas off. Last year, they took Christmas off. This year, they appear to just not be getting as much traction as they had in the past. That's not to say they have been inactive, by the way. It's just when you go to places like their social media, they're getting soddle traction now. So whenever they do things, you know, usually spraying buildings orange because that's how you get things done. You spray glass up and yeah, that accomplishes so much. No one's really paying any attention to them anymore. So what I thought I'd do, because they were in the news last week after a bit of a gap, I thought we'd go over what they were doing that further proved the credentials that they're nothing more than middle-class white kids who are funded by their families and other very wealthy donors who themselves we're going to talk about in a moment as well. So we'll start with a recent protest from Just Stop Oil during a performance of Les Miserables in, and you guessed it right, London, the West End, more notably, the Sondheim Theatre. During a performance of the song Do You Hear the People Sing, members of the Just Stop Oil group stormed the stage with banners. The audience responded in the exact way you thought they'd respond, by booing. Technical staff had to quickly storm the stage, the safety curtain then came down, followed by the main curtain. 4 protesters then locked themselves to the stage, and because they're down and hip with the kids, they posted to Twitter, 4 people are locked to the stage at the French Revolution themed show. Valjean steals bread to feed a starving child. How long before we are all forced to steal? Well, based on what we're seeing in California, not long at all. Some people have children to feed, so naturally they're stealing iPhones, Rolexes, Jean-Paul Gaultier, Armani, the usual working class stuff you need to feed your kids. Hannah Taylor of Just Stop Oil was quoted by Sky News as saying, "The show cannot go on. We are facing a catastrophe. New oil and gas means crop failure, starvation and death. It is an act of war on the global south and an utter betrayal of young people." Yes, which is why advancements in science are being made to improve the genetic quality and yield in return of certain foods that are under threat. I don't think storming the stage of Les Miserables will in any way lead to a meaningful change. All it does is show how out of touch you guys are. And also, you know, if you went and did this in a Mackie D, you'd have your heads kicked in. You went to Nando's and did it, you'd have your heads kicked in and then you'd have peri-peri salt drizzled on you. You are so out of touch that instead of providing solution, all you do is say, well, you can't appreciate art at a time of crisis. Everything's a fucking crisis at this point. I had this discussion the other night with somebody, one of my lovely mods, that we should always seek to make sure our country is as safe as it can be and the people within it too. However, there will never be a time where that can ever be achieved, and the context was foreign aid basically. So how do you balance this? Just Stop Oil think the way to fix this is to simply stop all new oil and gas licenses. The problem is, to make this country as green as it needs to be, it has already been conceded by people within the UN and environmental groups. Vast numbers of humans are going to die in the process. Some speculated up to 50%, a Thanos-like snap to rectify the world. Obviously, the consequences for these individuals was that they were all arrested. The Metropolitan Police confirmed at 9 PM on Wednesday the 4th of October the police were called to a protest inside a theatre, and 5 people total were arrested. The theatre have offered full refunds for the performance because the theatre had to be evacuated. So what you're doing here, folks, is the way you're going to go about ensuring that you save the world is by making sure people don't earn any money for work, which will totally get them on your side. But the bigger picture of the world is what really matters here, folks, right? BBC Springwatch presenter Chris Packham has admitted that protests from Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil are failing. When speaking at the Cheltenham Literature Festival, he said, "Is contemporary climate protesting working? And I start from the standpoint where they, the government, have issued hundreds of licenses for gas and oil exploration. They are reining back on net zero, the list goes on. It is quite a daily event. So you could argue that for all our protests in recent years, it hasn't been working." And he's right. The Conservatives realise that to do what they have set their net zero goal to be, it isn't possible without huge, drastic changes, seismic in the scale of the United Kingdom, that would effectively harm one of our commodities, the economy. So how do we achieve net zero? The answer is we can't. Not without trying to buy additional time or making drastic changes. The Conservatives, though, as we're edging nearer and nearer to election season, much like the Labour Party, are going to start making promises. These promises are blank, void, null, hollow, shallow, ineffective, solely done to get more casuals to vote for them. At this point, it is a given that Labour are going to win, because I can't see how the Conservatives can pull this one out of the bag. Their own infighting undoing themselves. But because of their infighting, the effectiveness of those protests has been nullified as well, because politicians like to hide behind a shield. The shield being, well, we need to nanny you so you can't protest and disrupt our business. As recently as last month, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak scaled back a string of flagship environmental policies, citing the unacceptable costs of net zero. Packham, the presenter, said that Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil needed a portfolio of techniques and should not just plough on regardless of their methods. Quote, "We as a community have to think, how do we change our approach? And I have some advice for that. Stop going to Wimbledon, the Crucible, the Ashes, rugby events, things that are a little more middle class comparative to the working class, and conquer your fear of the higher classes. You know, the people that back you. Because it is that same fear that stops you actually going for those who actually implement the changes that are negative to the country, that you say you want to stand up against. The middle classes don't give a damn, and you can try and condition children in schools, but it's not going to work either because there's another generational gap forming. The more recent generation just want to work, something which I can really appreciate. Unlike you dossers, who think it's an occupation to be a climate activist. Which is interesting because many of you are in fact funded by some wealthy individuals who made billions out of the oil and gas industry. And while we're on that subject of wealthy backers, businessman Dale Vince is to stop funding Just Stop Oil, saying further protests would be counterproductive. Mr. Vince is a well-known major Labour Party donor. He believes that further action was pointless because the government had shown it would drill for oil come what may. Further disruption would help feed the Tories' culture war narrative. He said instead he would divert funding to the anti-conservative vote. We found this out via an article he wrote for The Guardian, in which he said in order to just stop oil, first we need to just stop the Tories, adding that he wanted to dedicate his time, energy and funding towards increasing the youth vote. A vote for anyone other than Labour or no vote at all is a vote for another Tory government, this time with a mandate to pursue its anti-green crusade. Spoken with no level of irony, when Rachel Reeves for the Labour Party recently suggested turning the green belt in our country into a brownfield site to build houses on it, which would be remarkably counterproductive to promoting a green environment when we erase that part of our country. Since February 2022, he has supported Just Stop Oil to the tune of £340,000. He has said that he always defended the group's tactics, which included blocking roads as well as disrupting high-profile events, but added that the government, which granted 100 new North Sea oil and gas licenses over the summer, made it clear that no amount of protest will sway it. Our government is not only unmoved by these protests, it believes it has struck electoral gold. And there is a point to that. They have to appeal to the very people who have now started voting for Labour, the common man, those that voted for Boris to get Brexit done. Dale Vince owns a green energy company called Ecotricity, and it has donated more than 1.4 million to Labour since 2014. The company's also though donated money to the Liberal Democrats, to the Green Party. It is quite active in donating to parties that are not conservative, because anything conservative at all times, according to many, is just really bad. You shouldn't be doing it. I couldn't give a shit. What's intriguing to me is recently the leader of the Labour Party has in fact called out Just Stop Oil, believing that their tactics are wrong and they, the activists, are arrogant. It's a very brave move when you're facing ideologues while your party itself is riddled in it as well. The point still stands though, considering what Just Stop Oil have been doing for a few years now. When you look at what they've actually accomplished, the answer is minimal. And their influence on places like social media is diminishing because they've not achieved what they set out to achieve and the government has ignored them. That's not to say Labour will do anything that will remotely acquiesce to their demands. No. Labour will also have to do things to appease the common man, the standard voter. If they try and push messages that are dangerous, there will be blowback. Although they have rejected the idea of them being influenced by Just Stop Oil, if they get into office next year and they do things that look like that, there are going to be many people calling shenanigans. And I, for one, will be one of them.